She washed ashore at dawn, barefoot, breathless, and carrying more than just her unborn child. He was a man who'd given up on saving anyone, including himself. Neither knew that what began with a rescue would become the miracle that rewrote their lives forever. Before we dive into this unforgettable story of redemption, love, and the quiet power of kindness, if heartfelt stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing. Your support helps us share more tales that remind us all. Healing often begins where the world least expects it. Now, let's begin. The tide had gone out, leaving behind a silver trail of foam and broken shells along the Oregon shoreline. Mist clung low to the sand, muffling the cries of distant gulls and softening the outlines of driftwood scattered like forgotten bones. The world felt paused, suspended between breath and exhale. Harlan Crow stood at the edge of the dunes, hands in the pockets of his weathered jacket, his breath forming faint clouds in the cold morning air. Beside him, a boy no older than 12 crouched in the wet sand, meticulously arranging a fan of clamshells by size and color. His name was Finn, but everyone called him Finn. He didn't speak much, didn't need to. Harlan had learned long ago that silence could say more than words ever could. This was their ritual. Morning walks by the sea before the tourists arrived or the sun broke through the mist. Harlan liked it best this way. Quiet, predictable, safe. Until today. Finn suddenly froze, his hands hovering over the shell he was about to place. He pointed toward the shoreline where the waves lapped against something tangled in seaweed and cloth. Harlan followed his gaze and narrowed his eyes. At first, he thought it was driftwood, maybe a broken sail or someone's lost tarp. But then he saw the outline of an arm, a pale hand, fingers curled slightly toward the sky. His body moved before his mind caught up. "Stay here," he barked, boots pounding across the sand. The woman lay face down, her dark hair soaked and fanned out like kelp around her head. Harlan rolled her gently onto her back. Her face was ghost pale, lips tinged blue, and her body. God, she was pregnant. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, a pulse. Faint, fragile, but there. He scooped her into his arms. She was freezing. Water dripped from her clothes, soaking into his jacket. She was heavier than she looked. Pregnancy and seawater, both exacting their weight. But he pushed forward, boots grinding into wet sand until he reached Finn. "Get the blankets from the truck," Harlan said. Finn didn't hesitate. He took off running toward the weather-beaten pickup parked at the edge of the trailhead. Harlan knelt, cradling the woman against his chest. Her breathing was shallow but steadying. Her eyes fluttered, then opened just barely. She tried to speak. No words came, only a soft whimper, a tear slipping down the curve of her cheek. "I've got you," Harlan said, his voice more tender than he expected. "You're safe now." The drive back was silent, save for the soft clicking of Finn's worry beads in the back seat. The woman lay bundled in every blanket they had, strapped in beside Harlan, her head lolling toward the window. She hadn't said a word, but he saw the questions in her eyes, half-formed, half-drowned. Back at the cabin, Harlan carried her inside and laid her on the old pull-out sofa near the fireplace. Finn lit the kindling without being asked, the room filled with warmth and wood smoke as Harlan knelt beside her again, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Her lips moved. A rasp. "Serafina Vale." "Serafina," he repeated softly, as if naming a newborn. "I'm Harlan. This is Finn. You washed up on the beach. Do you remember what happened?" She blinked slowly. Then her hand drifted to her swollen belly. They pushed me." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, small, dark, and full of violence. "Who?" Harlan asked, her eyes filled with terror, but she clutched his arm with surprising strength. "Please don't let them find me. Please." Harlan looked at Finn. The boy was watching them both, intently, expression unreadable, but something in his gaze told Harlan what to do. "You're safe here," he said. "Whoever they are, they won't get through me." That night, as rain began to drum against the roof, Harlan sat alone by the fireplace, sipping lukewarm coffee. Serafina was asleep, her breathing steadier now. Her cheeks had regained a little color. Finn had insisted on sleeping on the floor near her, a blanket wrapped around him like armor. Harlan watched the two of them, the stranger and the son he'd rescued from wreckage years ago, and felt something stir in his chest, a memory, maybe, or something even older. He rose quietly and stepped outside. The sea was dark now, invisible under the night sky, but he could hear it. The constant, ancient rhythm of the waves. How many lives had it taken? How many had it given back? He thought of the baby growing inside Serafina. Thought of her words. They pushed me. Someone had tried to kill her child. And yet here she was, alive by his fire. Maybe it was chance, or fate. Or maybe, as he'd begun to believe in small doses, life sometimes sent the broken back to the broken, not to be fixed, but to find what was left worth saving. Inside, the fire crackled softly. Harlan took one last breath of the salt-kissed night and whispered into the wind, "Whatever brought her here, I won't waste it." By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a wet hush that blanketed the forest and the sea. Drops clung to every pine needle, glistened along the edge of the cabin's tin roof, and tapped now and then against the windowpane in a soft rhythm. Serafina Vale opened her eyes slowly. Her first breath was sharp, pulling air into lungs that felt bruised. The warmth wrapped around her was unfamiliar. So was the rough flannel blanket that smelled faintly of wood smoke and salt. Her body ached, her head throbbed, and her belly, large, tight, and strangely still, reminded her that she hadn't been dreaming. She turned her head. A young boy sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, a spiral notebook open in his lap. He wasn't drawing her. He wasn't even looking at her. But there was something about the way he sat, so focused, that calmed the screaming in her chest. She shifted slightly. The boy looked up. Their eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't flinch, just stared with the intense, quiet presence of someone who noticed everything but rarely said a word. "You're safe," a voice said gently from across the room. Serafina startled. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a flannel shirt tucked loosely into jeans, stood near the stove, stirring something in a dented pot. His hair was dark with silver streaks at the temples, his face weathered but steady. He looked like the kind of man who fixed broken fences and didn't talk unless he meant it. "You remember anything?" he asked, setting the spoon down and walking slowly toward her. She tried to sit up but winced. "Take it easy," he said. "You hit the rocks hard, probably some bruised ribs. You're lucky to be alive." Alive? That word hit like a slap. Her hand flew to her stomach. "The baby?" "She's fine," he said calmly. "Strong heartbeat. I called a nurse I trust. She talked me through what to check for. You'll both need to see someone in person soon, but for now, she's hanging in there." Serafina exhaled, her hand still on her belly. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, in a whisper, "They tried to kill us." The man nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "I'm Harlan," he said. "This here's Finn." He glanced toward the boy who had gone back to drawing. "You already told me your name." "Serafina." She nodded slowly. "Where am I?" "Oregon coast. About 20 miles from Seaview. Closest neighbors 4 miles out. You washed up near our trailhead." Serafina closed her eyes. She remembered the yacht, the heated argument, the hand on her back, the jolt as she hit the water, the desperate flail toward the surface, and then nothing. "I can't go back," she said suddenly. "I won't." "You don't have to," Harlan replied. His voice was low, steady, like someone who knew what it meant to run from something you couldn't name, only feel. Later that morning, Harlan made oatmeal while Serafina slowly sipped tea, her hands trembling just slightly. She sat on the edge of the pull-out sofa, wrapped in a dry blanket, wearing one of Harlan's flannel shirts tied around her waist. It hung loose, oversized, but it was warm. Finn placed a small bowl of wild blueberries on the table beside her. He didn't say anything, just left them there and returned to his notebook. She watched him go, eyes moist. "He's your son?" she asked. Harlan stirred the pot. "Sort of. I took him in after the accident. He was 8. His folks didn't make it." Serafina swallowed. "He seems gentle." "He is. And smart. Sees more than most grown men ever will." She looked around. The cabin was modest, handmade shelves lined with books, a chipped mug with pencils near the window, a thick quilt draped over the rocking chair. But it was more than a place. It felt safe. "I don't even know what day it is," she murmured. "Saturday," Harlan said. Serafina laughed softly. It was the first sound of lightness she'd made in days, and it startled her. "I'm supposed to be testifying in a hearing on Monday," she said, "against my husband. I didn't get to file the final papers, but I had copies of everything in my bag." Harlan sat across from her. "There was no bag when I found you." She nodded slowly. "Of course not." There was a silence, not awkward, just deep. "He's powerful," she said. "Luther. He has people, lawyers, money, control. And yet you're here," Harlan said evenly. "Alive. With that little girl still kicking inside you." Serafina's hand instinctively rested on her belly again. "I don't know what to do next." "You don't have to know yet." She looked up, eyes meeting his. "Why are you helping me?" Harlan leaned back in the chair. "Because someone helped me once. Because I know what it's like to wake up and not recognize your life anymore. And because I didn't pull you from that water just to watch you drown on land." She blinked rapidly, biting her lip. Then slowly, deliberately, Finn walked over and handed her the drawing he'd been working on. It was rough, childlike, but beautiful in its own way, a woman on a beach surrounded by sea glass and waves, and in her arms, a baby. She covered her mouth with one hand, the paper shaking in the other. "Thank you," she whispered. "Both of you." Harlan didn't say anything, but when Finn sat back down closer to her this time, and Serafina reached over to gently touch his hair, something shifted in the cabin. Not much, just enough. If you're enjoying this story of unexpected connection and resilience, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring narratives. We appreciate your support. Now, let's return to Serafina, Harlan, and Finn. The following days unfolded like pages in a slow, quiet novel, each one edged in mist, silence, and small acts of grace. Serafina spent most of her time near the window seat, legs curled beneath her, hands always resting on her belly as though to anchor herself to something real. Outside, the Oregon coast remained wild and indifferent. The sea continued to breathe in and out, dragging driftwood up and down the shore like a mother rocking her restless child. Harlan kept himself busy, chopping firewood, checking crab traps, tending the small vegetable patch out back. He spoke little but with intention. And when he did speak, he looked her in the eye, not around or through her. That was new and grounding. Finn, meanwhile, hovered on the periphery, never intrusive, never absent. His presence felt like sunlight through fog, gentle but steady. Every morning he set out on his own walk to collect shells or smooth stones. Every afternoon he returned with something carefully chosen and placed it beside Serafina's teacup without a word. The first was a piece of driftwood shaped like a heart, then a sand dollar, then a feather so soft and white she thought it had come from a dream. One morning, after a night of strange, half-submerged dreams, Serafina stepped into the kitchen and found Finn sitting at the table drawing again. The cabin was quiet, the fire low, the air crisp with pine and sea salt. She poured herself tea and sat across from him. She didn't speak at first. Neither did he. But something had shifted in her. Maybe it was the baby kicking with renewed vigor that morning, or the first full night of sleep she'd had in weeks. Or maybe it was just the simple warmth of being in a place where no one asked her to explain herself. She looked down at his drawing, a lighthouse, stark against a stormy sky. It's beautiful, she said softly. Finn didn't respond immediately. He added a streak of yellow near the top, light from the tower, then handed her the pencil. Your turn. She blinked, surprised. I'm not an artist. He shrugged. No rules. Something about the way he said it made her smile. She picked up the pencil and slowly shaded in the waves beneath the lighthouse, careful not to disrupt his lines. No rules, she echoed. Later that day, Harlan returned from the local post office with supplies, canned goods, dry firewood, and an old box of maternity clothes someone from the town church had dropped off. He handed them to her without comment, but she noticed the way he lingered by the doorway as though unsure whether to step in or step out. I could have gone with you, Serafina offered, sensing the hesitation. He shook his head. Not yet. Word travels fast around here. She looked down. You think he's looking for me? Harlan nodded. I think he's always looking. Men like Luther Vale don't just let go. Especially not when they think you're carrying something that belongs to them. Her hand instinctively went to her belly again. Not from fear this time, but protectiveness. He doesn't get to decide who she belongs to, she whispered. Harlan's gaze softened. He set the supplies down, then pulled out something else from his coat pocket. A small wrapped bundle of dried lavender. For your pillow, he said. Might help you sleep. Serafina stared at it, then at him. You're not what I expected. Neither are you, he replied, and disappeared outside with the empty crates. That evening, while Finn read a weathered copy of Island of the Blue Dolphins by the fire, Serafina sat knitting, a skill she hadn't touched in years but suddenly remembered with her hands. The needles clicked gently in rhythm with the popping firewood. Every so often, she glanced at Harlan, who was sanding down an old rocking chair on the porch. How long have you been out here? She asked. 7 years. Why? He didn't answer right away. Noise got too loud, he said finally. The world, myself, needed a place where I could hear the ocean think again. She smiled faintly. Did it help? A pause. Then he added, the rest I learned to live with. That night, as Serafina tucked the lavender sachet beneath her pillow and climbed into bed, the baby stirred, 3 firm kicks in succession. She placed both hands on her belly and whispered, You're safe. I promise. And for the first time since she'd boarded that cursed yacht, she believed it. In the morning, Harlan found her outside on the porch, sitting in the newly sanded rocking chair, wrapped in a wool blanket, sipping tea. She didn't look broken or lost anymore. She looked, waiting. For what it's worth, he said, leaning on the railing beside her, you're good for this place. She looked up, surprised. What makes you say that? Finn laughed yesterday when you dropped that ladle in the stew pot. Her eyes widened. He laughed? Harlan nodded. Hadn't heard that sound in 2 years. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sea. The waves came in and went out. The morning sun filtered through the trees, warm and golden. Serafina rocked gently, her eyes closed, the cup of tea warm in her hands. And the mist, for once, lifted early. The wind changed that morning. It wasn't dramatic. Not the kind that toppled trees or sent waves clawing at the shoreline. It was quieter than that, a shift in the air, a current that stirred pine needles and set the chimes above the porch into a soft, uneasy song. Harlan noticed it first. He stood near the woodshed, axe in hand, mid-swing, when the chill swept across his shoulders. He paused, eyes narrowing toward the trail that led to the main road. Nothing but trees and silence, but something in his gut whispered, not for long. Back inside, Serafina hummed softly while folding baby clothes, donations from the town's charity bin, tiny socks, pastel onesies, soft flannel blankets. Finn sat beside her, methodically organizing everything by color, then size. The boy had become her quiet shadow, not intrusive, just present, like grace itself. The door creaked open, and Harlan stepped in, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was unreadable, but she noticed the stiffness in his shoulders. "Everything okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Storm coming?" She tilted her head. "I thought the weather looked clear." "Not that kind of storm." Serafina froze. She saw it then. Something dark threading behind his eyes. It wasn't the ocean he was worried about. It was the past, and the men who knew how to weaponize silence. That afternoon, Harlan made the rare choice to drive into Seaview for supplies. He didn't want to, but he needed to check the mail and pick up medication the nurse had arranged for Serafina. "You sure?" she asked, her voice low as he packed a duffel with canned goods and propane cartridges. He looked at her. "Can't hide forever. Besides, people will ask fewer questions if I keep up my routine." She stepped closer. "Be careful." He gave a nod, then paused. "If anything happens, anything at all, you take Finn, the emergency bag, and go straight into the tree line. There's a small path behind the garden. It leads to the old ranger station. You remember where the key is?" She nodded, throat tight. Harlan looked between her and Finn. "I'll be back before dusk." He wasn't lying, but he wasn't entirely sure either. The town of Seaview was, as he remembered, quiet, weathered, and suspicious of strangers, but loyal to its own. The clerk at the general store gave him a polite nod. The postmaster handed over a small stack of mail, mostly ads and bills, but it was the envelope at the bottom that made him pause. No return address, elegant handwriting. He slipped it into his jacket without reading it and finished his errands in silence. On the way back, he took the long road home through the dense thicket, the backlogging trails only locals used. He needed time to think, time to breathe, time to prepare for what he feared was coming. Back at the cabin, dusk settled in like a heavy sigh. Serafina paced near the front windows, one hand resting on her belly, the other holding the cordless phone Harlan had left just in case. The shadows outside lengthened. Finn noticed her tension. He got up from the table, walked to the old photograph, and placed a worn vinyl onto the player. A gentle melody filled the room, strings and piano soft as falling snow. Serafina turned, surprised. "You like this music?" she asked. Finn shrugged. "It's calming." "It is," she agreed, letting the melody soften the sharp edges in her chest. Then headlights broke the tree line. She exhaled. But as the truck pulled up, her breath caught again. It wasn't Harlan's. The SUV was sleek, black, and out of place among the pines and gravel. The engine idled for a moment before the driver stepped out. A tall man in a charcoal suit, expensive and dry despite the damp air. His hair was sharp, his movements sharper. He walked slowly toward the porch, a man not used to being denied. Serafina pulled Finn behind her and opened the door just a crack. "Mrs. Vale," the man said, smiling without warmth. "You've been difficult to locate." She said nothing. "I'm not here to make a scene, Mrs. Vale. Your husband would like to offer a compromise, a peaceful solution, one that ensures your comfort and safety, and the child's future." She held the door tighter. "You were reported lost at sea," the man continued. "Your return will raise questions, headlines, court investigations. But if you sign a statement saying you left voluntarily, Mr. Vale will ensure you're provided for generously." Finn's hand slipped into hers. She squeezed it tightly. "I have nothing to say," she replied coldly. The man's smile thinned. "He can make this very difficult for you." "I've already survived difficult," she said. "Tell him that." Then, without waiting, she shut the door and locked it. Harlan returned 20 minutes later. Serafina met him at the door, eyes blazing. "They found me," she said, his jaw clenched. "Who?" "Your guess is as good as mine. But they knew my name. Knew I was here." He exhaled slowly. "I'll handle it." "How?" she demanded. "They won't stop." Harlan's voice was even. "Then we don't stop either." He walked to the fireplace, pulled a small lockbox from the mantel, and opened it. Inside were documents, maps, a burner phone, and a flash drive. She stared. "You were planning to run." "I was planning for this moment," he said. "In case the past ever came looking." He handed her a key. "Tomorrow, I teach you the trail. If I'm not here, you go." Serafina held the key tightly in her hand, something steely rising in her chest. She looked toward Finn, who stood in the doorway, watching them both. "I'm not leaving without all of us," she said. Harlan gave a slow nod. The storm was here. But this time, they would not be swept away. The rain came just after midnight. Not a drizzle, not a passing squall. This was a storm with a memory. What will this storm bring? Will Serafina, Harlan, and Finn find a way to protect their fragile sanctuary and the new life within it? Join us next time as their unforgettable story continues. If you were captivated by this chapter, please leave a comment below and share this video with someone who appreciates stories of hope found in the most unexpected places. Don't forget to subscribe for more moving tales. Until then, thank you for watching. Thunder rolled in from the Pacific like an ancient beast waking from slumber. Winds howled through the trees, bending pines like brittle reeds. Rain slammed against the windows and sheets, and the sea beyond the cliffs roared louder than any warning. Inside the cabin, the fireplace struggled to compete with the fury outside. Flames danced and flickered against shadows that stretched long across the floor. Harlan stood at the front door, one hand on the frame, his jaw set tight. His instincts, sharpened by years on the water, told him something was coming. But it wasn't just from the storm. It was from within. Serafina gripped the edge of the table, her eyes wide, breath sharp. The first contraction had nearly dropped her to her knees. The second came just minutes later. Now they were closer. Heavier, unmistakable. "It's happening," she whispered, voice trembling. Harlan turned to her, calm but focused. "How far apart?" "Maybe 3, 4 minutes," she gasped. He didn't hesitate. He crossed the room, gently but firmly guiding her toward the pull-out bed near the fire. "All right, we're doing this here." "No hospital?" she asked, pain lacing her voice, not just physical, but fear. "Roads are washed out. We'd never make it in time. You and I, we've got this." You've done this before." He hesitated for only a moment. "Once, years ago. It wasn't mine, but I helped." Serafina met his eyes, searching. Then she nodded, trusting him more than she trusted the storm, the world, or even herself. Finn was already moving. Without being asked, he retrieved the emergency kit from under the cabinet, spread clean towels across the mattress, and placed a flashlight and bottled water within arm's reach. His hands were steady, his breathing even. "Is this okay for him to see?" Serafina asked between gasps. Harlan knelt beside her. "He's seen worse. And right now, he's doing what he does best, staying present." Outside, lightning cracked the sky wide open. Inside, Serafina screamed. The labor was fast. Too fast. Her body had been through too much already: trauma, saltwater, emotional strain, and now it was hurtling toward the inevitable with terrifying momentum. "I can't," she cried out as another contraction seized her. "Yes, you can," Harlan said, voice steady, warm. "You're not alone. I'm right here. Finn's right here. You are not alone." Tears streaked her face. Her hair clung to her forehead. Every nerve in her body was on fire. And still, she pushed. Finn placed a damp cloth on her brow. She reached out blindly and took his hand. He didn't flinch, just nodded once as if to say, "You've got this." Another contraction, another push, and then a cry, small, raw, alive. The sound filled the room like a hymn. Harlan lifted the baby, gently wrapped her in a warm towel, and handed her to Serafina with hands that had once only known how to rescue, not deliver. But tonight, they had done both. "She's perfect," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. Serafina stared at the newborn on her chest, her hands trembling as she cradled the tiny body, slick with life and light. The baby's eyes fluttered open for the briefest moment, and something ancient passed between them. "I didn't think we'd make it," Serafina whispered. "You did," Harlan said. "And now she's here." For a long while, no one moved. The storm continued to rage outside as if the world itself had paused to make way for something more sacred. In the dim firelight, the cabin had never felt warmer, never more like home. Then slowly, Harlan stood and walked to the window. Rain poured down in steady rivulets. He wiped the fog from the glass and scanned the edge of the forest. No headlights, no movement. But something gnawed at his gut. Not yet, he told himself. But soon, Serafina named her daughter Grace. She said it aloud as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, soft gold-tinged rays piercing the last of the storm clouds. It was a name she had carried in her heart for years, long before the yacht, before the betrayal, before the shoreline had nearly become her grave. "Grace," she whispered, kissing the baby's forehead. "Because she's the reason I lived when I should have drowned." Finn stood nearby, the same notebook in his hands. He carefully sketched the moment, Serafina in the rocking chair, baby in her arms, the fire glowing behind her. He drew quietly, but with reverence. "She's going to change everything," he said, not quite looking up. Serafina turned to him, eyes shining. "I think she already has." Later that morning, Harlan stepped outside to gather more firewood. The air was damp and clean, the world washed anew. He paused beside the trail leading to the ranger station, his gaze lingering on the curve of the path. He couldn't explain it, but he knew they weren't safe yet. The men behind Luther Vale wouldn't give up easily. Wealth had a long reach, and even though Luther hadn't shown up himself, the threat had already arrived once. It would again. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. But then he thought of Grace, of the way Serafina had clutched her, not in fear, but in triumph. He thought of Finn's calm, unwavering presence, of the way this broken boy had become a quiet guardian, of something more whole than anyone had expected. And he thought of himself, not the man he was, or even the man he had hoped to be, but the man who had sat by a fire, knees muddy, catching new life in his calloused hands. He wasn't running this time. He was staying. That night, after Grace had drifted off to sleep and Serafina lay beside her with a soft smile of exhaustion, Harlan walked out to the porch. Finn followed. The two stood together, father and son, not by blood, but by bond, watching the moonlight dance over the wet earth. "She's strong," Finn said. Harlan nodded. "She gets it from her mother." "From you too," Finn added quietly. Harlan looked down at the boy. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he reached out and placed a steady hand on Finn's shoulder. "We protect this," he said. "Whatever it takes." And as the night deepened and the stars returned, Harlan knew that no matter what storms came next, they were no longer adrift. They were anchored by love, by fire, and by a child named Grace. The sun had barely lifted above the horizon when Harlan found the envelope. It was sitting on the porch steps, dry despite the morning dew, placed with precision, not dropped, not windblown, delivered. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, elegant, expensive. A name scrolled in ink across the front, Serafina Vale. Harlan's jaw clenched. He scanned the tree-line. Nothing. Not even the softest rustle of branches. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single page, typed. Formal deceit wrapped in courtesy. "Mrs. Vale," it read, "as a courtesy to our shared history, I offer you the opportunity to return quietly, without scandal or legal obstruction. The child you carry, while biologically mine, need not suffer the consequences of your emotional instability and recent actions. If you decline this offer, be advised that I have the legal means to pursue full custody." It was signed simply, Luther. Clean, icy. Harlan folded the letter slowly, walked inside, and set it on the kitchen table. Serafina was at the sink, gently washing Grace's bottles, the baby asleep in the sling tied across her chest. She hummed softly, a melody with no words. Finn sat on the floor nearby, building a miniature lighthouse out of driftwood and buttons. Harlan didn't speak. He just slid the letter toward her. Serafina dried her hands and read in silence. Her face didn't change, not at first, but Harlan saw the faint trembling of her bottom lip, the tightening in her jaw, the way her hand protectively curled over Grace's tiny head. "He's bluffing," she said, her voice steady but hoarse. "He's reaching," Harlan replied. "And men like that only reach when they feel control slipping." She looked at him. "But he does have resources, lawyers, influence." "I have you," he said simply. "And now we've got something stronger than money or threats. We've got truth." Serafina exhaled slowly. "Then maybe it's time we stop hiding." That afternoon, she asked for the files. The ones Harlan had hidden in the lockbox months ago. Financial statements, medical records, photographs of bruises, of documents torn in rage, of messages laced with subtle terror. "I was going to take them to court," she told him. "I had everything prepared. But I waited too long. I kept giving him one more chance, and he used everyone against me." Finn sat quietly nearby, listening. He didn't ask questions, but his eyes, those steady blue-gray eyes, missed nothing. Serafina looked at him. "You know what it's like, don't you? When someone bigger than you decides your world for you." Finn nodded, then handed her a piece of paper. A sketch. It was Grace, but older, maybe 5 or 6. Standing tall, arms stretched wide, her hair in the wind. Behind her, 2 silhouettes, one holding a hammer, the other a notebook. "She'll have us," he said. And in that simple sentence, Serafina felt something shift. Not fear, not anxiety, but conviction. The next day, they drove into Seaview. Harlan didn't like it, but he knew it had to be done. Serafina wore one of the donated dresses, her hair pulled into a low braid. She looked neither broken nor theatrical, just strong, grounded. Grace slept in her arms, wrapped in a navy blue sling. The courthouse sat quiet at the edge of town. They didn't go inside, just dropped the envelope with the court clerk, a letter from Serafina accompanied by copies of everything. Her statement, her refusal to disappear, her choice to stand up, not just for herself, but for her daughter. When the clerk asked if she wanted protection, Serafina simply said, "I already have it." And turned to smile at Harlan. Back at the cabin, life didn't return to normal. It evolved. Grace began to wake more, her cries sharp and insistent, her tiny fingers wrapping around Finn's thumb with a grip that startled them all. Serafina sang her old songs, lullabies, sometimes just the hum of her heart. Finn built Grace a cradle out of reclaimed pine. He carved her name into the side with a wood burner Harlan had kept in the shed. Serafina cried when she saw it, and Finn, without a word, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. In that quiet gesture, a silent promise passed between them, a shared understanding of loss, and a fierce, unspoken vow to protect the fragile new life they had found. The letter from Luther lay on the table, a stark reminder of the danger that still lingered, but within the walls of the small cabin, a different kind of power was growing. It wasn't the power of money or influence, but the quiet strength of a makeshift family, bound by circumstance and forged in kindness. Days turned into weeks. The rhythm of the cabin settled into a gentle routine punctuated by Grace's coos and cries, the rhythmic crash of the waves, and the steady, unspoken communication between its inhabitants. Harlan, the man who had retreated from the world, found himself drawn back in, not by obligation, but by a sense of protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. Finn, the silent boy who saw more than he said, found a purpose in his quiet guardianship of both mother and child. And Serafina, the woman who had washed ashore broken, began to heal in the salty air and the unwavering acceptance of these 2 unexpected saviors. But the threat of Luther Vale still hung heavy in the air, an unseen storm gathering on the horizon. Harlan knew that the peace they had found was fragile, a temporary reprieve. He checked the trails regularly, his senses alert for any sign of intrusion. He taught Serafina the escape route, patiently showing her the landmarks, the hidden turns, the way to move silently through the undergrowth. He prepared for a confrontation he hoped would never come, his calloused hands never far from the old rifle he kept above the fireplace. Serafina, cradling Grace close, found a wellspring of resilience she never knew she possessed. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now intertwined with a fierce protectiveness, a mother's unwavering resolve to keep her child safe. She watched Harlan, his quiet strength, his unwavering commitment, and she knew that she wasn't alone in this fight. And in Finn's silent presence, in the unwavering loyalty in his blue-gray eyes, she found an unexpected ally, a steadfast guardian for her daughter. The letter remained on the kitchen table, a constant reminder of the powerful man who sought to control their lives. But it no longer held the same power. It was a threat, yes, but it was also a catalyst, hardening their resolve, solidifying the unlikely bond that had formed on that misty Oregon shoreline. They were no longer just survivors, they were a family, forged in the crucible of fear and bound by the quiet miracle of love and kindness. And they would face whatever storm came next, together. The quiet power of kindness had indeed rewritten their lives. But the story is far from over. The echoes of the past still linger, and the threat to their newfound peace remains. What will happen when Luther Vale's reach extends once more? Will their fragile sanctuary hold? Join us next time for the next chapter in this unforgettable story of resilience and the enduring strength of the human spirit. If you've been moved by Serafina, Harlan, and Finn's journey, please share this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the extraordinary in the ordinary. Thank you for watching. The days that followed were steeped in a tense quietude. The rhythm of their lives continued, the comforting routine of chores, the soft murmur of Serafina singing to Grace, Finn's quiet observations of the natural world. But beneath the surface, a current of unease flowed. Harlan moved with a heightened awareness, every rustle of leaves, every distant sound, drawing his attention. He'd begun sleeping lightly, the rifle never far from his reach. Serafina saw the shift in him. The easygoing quiet had been replaced by a watchful stillness. She didn't press him, understanding the weight of the unspoken threat. Instead, she focused her energy on Grace, finding solace and strength in the tiny life she held. Each coo, each gurgle, was a defiant act against the darkness that loomed. Even Finn seemed more alert. His silent wanderings now took him further along the perimeter of their land, his keen eyes scanning for anything out of place. He would return with his usual treasures, a uniquely shaped piece of driftwood, a perfectly smooth stone, but there was a new intensity in his gaze, a silent participation in the unspoken vigilance. One crisp morning, Finn left a small, hand-carved wooden bird on Grace's cradle. It was simple, almost crude, but imbued with a quiet tenderness. Serafina picked it up, a lump forming in her throat. It felt like more than just a gift. It was a symbol of their fragile sanctuary, a silent promise of protection. Harlan continued Serafina's lessons on the escape trail. He pointed out subtle markers, a uniquely bent branch, a cluster of moss on a particular rock, the faint indentation of a deer path that intersected their route. He emphasized the need for silence, for moving with the forest, not against it. Serafina listened intently, Grace nestled securely in a sling against her chest, absorbing the knowledge with a grim determination. The burner phone lay on the mantelpiece, charged and ready. It was a last resort, a lifeline to a world they had deliberately distanced themselves from. Harlan had programmed a single number into it, the trusted nurse in Seaview, their only connection to the outside. Unbeknownst to them, their carefully constructed peace was beginning to fray. Miles away, Luther Vale's patience had run thin. The local investigator he'd hired had finally provided a lead, a hushed conversation overheard at the Seaview diner, a description of a battered pickup truck, a fleeting glimpse of a woman with dark hair and a child. The pieces were starting to fit. Luther, accustomed to control and obedience, viewed Serafina's disappearance not as an act of self-preservation, but as an act of defiance. The child she carried was his heir, and the thought of her denying him that, of creating a life beyond his reach, fueled a cold, simmering rage. He made a call, his voice low and menacing. It was time to expedite things. The quiet of the forest began to be disturbed by more than just the wind and the calls of birds. A new presence was moving through the trees, silent and deliberate, drawn by the whispers of the small town and the undeniable pull of what had been lost. Inside the cabin, life continued its gentle rhythm, unaware of the approaching storm. Grace stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand reaching out blindly. Serafina stroked her cheek, a soft smile gracing her lips. In that moment, surrounded by the simple warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of Harlan and Finn, she allowed herself a fleeting moment of peace, a fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could truly be safe here. The illusion of peace shattered with a sharp, distinct sound from outside, the unmistakable crack of a twig underfoot. Harlan's head snapped up, his eyes instantly alert, his hand instinctively moving towards the rifle above the fireplace. The quiet vigilance had just become a tangible threat. Serafina's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at Harlan, the color draining from her face. Finn rose silently from his drawing, his usual quiet demeanor replaced by a focused intensity. The storm they had been bracing for had finally arrived, not in the fury of wind and rain, but in the silent, deliberate footsteps approaching their door. The old wooden door, their only shield against the encroaching darkness, suddenly seemed thin and inadequate. The fragile sanctuary they had built, brick by painstaking brick of kindness and quiet understanding, was about to be tested. The miracle that had begun on the shoreline was now facing its most formidable challenge. Harlan's hand tightened on the rifle. The man who had given up on saving anyone was now ready to fight for this unexpected family, for the woman who had washed ashore with a secret and a hope, and for the silent boy who had found his voice in their shared vulnerability. The quiet power of their bond was about to meet the brutal force of the outside world. The fragile peace has been broken. The threat has arrived at their doorstep. What will happen when the past finally catches up to Serafina? Will Harlan be able to protect them? And what role will Finn play in the looming confrontation? Join us next time for the gripping continuation of their story. If you're on the edge of your seat, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next thrilling installment. Share your predictions in the comments below. Thank you for watching.